Today I will take you on a journey through history to a company hidden in the secret backstage of the past, a company whose power, size, and wealth are still spoken of even today. But what if you have never even heard its name? Think about today's giants: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and even Saudi Aramco. Consider the enormous power and wealth of these modern corporations. Now brace yourself. Why is it that even the combined value of all these companies cannot reach the colossal fortune of a single company that existed 400 years ago? Yes, when capitalism and modern finance are mentioned, I can already guess the names that come to mind: the Rothschild or Rockefeller families. But what if I told you that long before them, there existed a system that changed the world, a system that came before these families and reshaped the global economy, a project that emerged silently, far from attention and spectacle, yet laid the very foundations of the world economy: the Dutch project. Today almost no one even mentions its name. Why does no one talk about the richest, most valuable, and most influential company in history? And the real question is this: was the capitalism we know today actually the experiment of a single company? Today, we will talk about this project. This project did not stop at founding a company. It built the world's first stock exchange, issued the first shares, carried out the first public offering, and laid the foundations of modern capitalism. It left behind such a legacy that its effects are still felt in our lives today. Now I will introduce you to the Dutch East India Company and the House of Orange. This is not merely a story of trade, but the story of how power, capital, and strategy came together to change the world. Get ready. We now return to the year 1580. On the Iberian Peninsula, the course of history was changing. Spain took control of Portugal through a personal union, fundamentally shaking the balance of world politics. Two major global powers were now united under a single monarchy, controlling vast territories across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. This was not merely a territorial union, but a burst of power. Spain suddenly absorbed Portugal's entire overseas empire and completely overturned the balance of power at sea. A massive sphere of dominance stretching from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean had emerged, and this situation increasingly alarmed one country in particular: the Netherlands. The Dutch perceived this union as a direct threat to their existence, because they were considered part of the Spanish Empire while simultaneously fighting for their independence. This struggle, known as the 80 Years' War, was already a long conflict, and now a much larger, wealthier, and more dangerous enemy had appeared before them. With Portugal under the Spanish crown, this new power became even more formidable. So what could the Dutch do? They knew they could not defeat this new superpower militarily. Spanish superiority on land was unquestionable, and at sea the Portuguese fleet stood as a massive rival. For this reason, the Dutch were forced to change strategy. They set aside traditional warfare and introduced a new kind of weapon, not a classical instrument of war. With this innovative tool, built from private capital and organized commercial power, they changed the game entirely. And here, history took a different direction. On the surface, the VOC appeared to be an ordinary trading company, buying and selling goods for profit. But behind the scenes lay far more complex and dangerous realities. The VOC was, in fact, an economic war machine. It possessed armed ships, private armies, strategic fortresses across the globe, and conducted its own diplomacy. It signed treaties, waged wars, and even governed its own territories. At this point, the VOC, an independent power like a state, represented far more than just a trading company. The VOC's shares were the most striking revolutionary innovation. For the first time in history, Dutch citizens could finance the growth of an empire and profit directly from it. At that time, wealth was usually associated with land ownership. You had to belong to a noble family or have close ties to royalty. But thanks to the VOC, even a merchant, craftsman, or middle-class Dutch citizen could participate in this economic system. The company achieved a scale of growth that no state had ever reached before, without needing the support of any kingdom and without collecting taxes. Wealth was no longer dependent on land and titles. It became a value that could be produced rapidly and on a massive scale through markets. At the helm were merchants who prepared strategies, made decisions, and directed the management of the company. But behind this massive structure, there was also a silent force at work, the active support of the House of Orange across the Republic. This was not a passive stance, but a highly strategic investment that became one of the key elements stabilizing the VOC. When the House of Orange is mentioned, an important point must be clarified. Despite the name, this dynasty has nothing to do with oranges. They took their name from the Principality of Orange in southern France, and emerged as one of the most influential dynasties of the period. However, unlike other European dynasties, they did not have a throne. The Dutch Republic was a system governed by merchants, and the House of Orange held only a weak title and a fragile peace within it. Nobility carried little meaning in this new world order. On one side, elite merchants in Amsterdam demanded a stronger republic and greater autonomy. On the other, Spain's powerful dynasty sought to eliminate them entirely. Their lands were not large enough to rule, and with the collapse of the feudal system, the House of Orange found itself at a crossroads. Either they would adapt to the changing world, or they would disappear into the dusty pages of history. They could no longer rely on feudal lands, and inheritance-based income was no longer sufficient. Strategy and capital were the two greatest assets they had left, and they used them. The House of Orange bound its fate tightly to the VOC. They did not directly manage the company or handle its daily operations, but they financed it. This was not symbolic, but a highly pragmatic strategy. In this new order, dominated by a merchant republic where inheritance no longer guaranteed power, the VOC gave the House of Orange an extraordinary strategic advantage. Over time, these ties became formalized, and William IV and William V accepted control of the VOC and the West India Company as their top executives. Their names were now counted among the most powerful figures not only in Europe but also in the Netherlands. As the VOC expanded eastward, seized trade routes, and opened new markets, the dynasty became more than just noble. They may not have worn crowns, but they derived their power from dividends, profits, and trade. While the VOC quietly built an empire from below, it also represented an ambitious family carrying the banner of the Republic. This dual structure was truly unique. It represented the power of trade with a public face, while secretly managing the strategy of an empire. Now let us speak of the immense size of the VOC. The VOC did not operate like a simple company. It acted like a sovereign state, even an empire. When its market value surpassed the GDP of many countries and it began defeating regular armies with its own private forces, it ceased to be just a company and became a massive empire. At its peak, the VOC reached a market value equivalent to $7.9 trillion in today's terms. To grasp the scale of this number, consider that today's most valuable company, Nvidia, has a market value roughly half of that, even if you combined Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Saudi Aramco. Reaching the VOC's peak valuation would still be extremely difficult. This was not merely an economic success, but a global hegemonic project, transporting over 1 million people from Europe to Asia. The VOC sustained its golden age from the early 1600s to the mid-1700s. Soldiers, sailors, merchants, craftsmen, administrators, spies, translators, and even families worked for a single megacorporation. They built and operated ports, protected warehouses, negotiated with local rulers, and enforced Dutch interest by force when necessary. This enormous scale rested on three pillars. The first was the special privileges granted by the Dutch Republic, including the right to make treaties, raise armies, occupy land, and govern colonies. In short, the VOC exercised the core powers of modern states. The second pillar was the capital and support of merchants and bankers who controlled Amsterdam's financial markets. Wealthy investors and speculators fueled the VOC's growth. The third, and perhaps most critical pillar, was the House of Orange, which provided political protection, diplomatic support, and long-term strategic guidance. The combination of these three forces turned the VOC into an unstoppable machine. The masterful fusion of economic, political, and military power made it one of the most impressive institutions not only of its time, but of all history. Even today, no company has reached its level of power and wealth. In 1619, the VOC captured Jakarta and renamed it Batavia. This was not just a city conquest, but the creation of a major strategic base in Asia. For 300 years, Batavia served as the center of the VOC's Asian operations. From there, trade networks extending to China, Japan, India, and the Arabian Peninsula were managed successfully. The founding of the VOC marked a turning point in trade and finance. When it went public in 1602, ordinary people could invest directly in a company for the first time in history. Share trading began. Prices fluctuated and speculation emerged. The concept of limited liability took shape, limiting shareholder risk to invested capital. This became a cornerstone of modern corporate law. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the first organized exchange in world history, was established. Many financial phenomena, from speculation to manipulation and crashes, were born there. In 1688, William of Orange went to England and initiated the Glorious Revolution. This led to the organization of public debt, the formation of bond markets, and the establishment of the Bank of England, inspired by the Dutch financial model. The English refined and globalized this model. Even New York traces its roots to the Netherlands. It was first called New Amsterdam, and its trade, credit mechanisms, and contract culture laid foundations of modern finance. Even the name Wall Street derives from a Dutch word meaning wall. In conclusion, the VOC was not merely a Dutch company, but one of the most important building blocks of the modern capitalist system. But every rise has a fall. By the late 1700s, corruption began to eat away at the VOC from within. Poor management, personal greed, competition from the British East India Company, French colonial powers, local resistance, changing market dynamics led to its dissolution in 1796. Its assets were absorbed by the Dutch state, but its architecture survived. Modern finance, multinational corporations, international law, limited liability, stock markets, central banks, public debt, and bond systems all trace their origins to the VOC. Although the Netherlands is geographically small, it remains a major financial center. The House of Orange-Nassau still exists as the Dutch royal family. Rotterdam is Europe's largest port, and Amsterdam remains a global financial hub. The architecture of capitalism they built still stands today. Yet it must not be forgotten that the VOC also has a dark history filled with massacres, forced labor, exploitation, and systemic violence. The Banda Islands Massacre, the Ambon Massacre, forced labor camps in Batavia, and slavery all represent this dark side. Millions of people suffered. Local cultures were destroyed, ecosystems damaged, and societies torn apart. This is not just a story of trade, but also one of violence and exploitation. The message remains unchanged. Power and capital are inseparable. The crown may be invisible, but it still exists. Kingdoms have been replaced by corporations, noble families by shareholders, and colonies by markets. The VOC teaches us that organized capital can be more powerful than states. In the modern world, the greatest powers are corporations, not governments. Apple's cash reserves exceed the GDP of many countries. Amazon's logistics network rivals armies. Google's control of data rivals intelligence agencies. These are not coincidences. The model created by the VOC continues today in different forms. So who wears the crown today? The answer is simple: invisible hands. Shareholders, investment funds, hedge funds, private equity groups. They are today's VOC. The names have changed, but the stage is the same. Power lies in invisible hands, and capital still rules the world. History repeats itself, only on a different stage. The 400-year story of the EVOC shows us the birth of capitalism and points to its future. Financial empires rise and fall, but the system of capital remains. Empires end, but capital structures evolve. Today, the VOC is gone, but its system is everywhere. In stock exchanges, banks, corporate headquarters, and boardrooms. Invisible, yet omnipresent. That is why the story of the VOC is not just the past, but also the present and the future. Because although history turns its pages, the fundamental logic has not changed. Capital creates power, power creates more capital, and this cycle continues forever. The House of Orange understood this 400 years ago. Who understands it today? If you liked my video, I would be happy if you subscribe to my channel.